picked his own intel chiefs. This time, the question was about whether Russia is still targeting the United States, something his national security team has testified under oath to be exactly what Russia is doing. But Donald Trump's answer was no.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press, let's go.
In case you missed that, here it is again.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press, let's go.
If the past 48 hours are any guide, we could put up a countdown clock for the old double negative explanation from the president himself. So far, no one has made a credible attempt at walking back the Day 3 cleanup of the Day 2 walk back. Sarah Huckabee Sanders tossed some word salad into the mix. The problem with her explanation is that it came 2.5 hours after Donald Trump publicly disagreed with the assessment of his own intelligence agencies. And on the heels of his universally panned performance in Helsinki, this is the kind of mistake that if it were really a mistake, any White House, even this one, could have cleaned it up immediately. The press corps sits about 10 steps away from the White House press secretary. This is not what that appears to be. Here's the press secretary trying to spin the president's latest disagreement with his own D&I.
We had a chance to speak with the president after those comments, and the president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions. The president and his administration are working very hard to make sure that Russia is unable to meddle in our elections, as they have done in the past and as we have stated.
And to illustrate just how out of step the president is with his national security team on the threat that Russia represents to our elections, here is his own director of national intelligence just last week.
It was in the months prior to September 2001 when, according to then CIA Director George Tenet, the system was blinking red. And here we are nearly two decades later, and I'm here to say the warning lights are blinking red again. These actions are persistent, they're pervasive, and they are meant to undermine America's democracy on a daily basis, regardless of whether it is election time or not.
It's only Wednesday, but the New York Times tries to put the week in context, writing, quote, Mr. Trump's comments were the latest in a dizzying collection of conflicting statements from Mr. Trump since he emerged from a private meeting with President Putin on Monday. And former CIA Director Michael Hayden boiled it down like this, tweeting, OMG, OMG, OMG. Here to help us digest the day's OMG developments, some of our favorite reporters and friends. Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at both the CIA and the Pentagon. From the Washington Post, White House correspondent Ashley Parker. And with us on set, Aaron Blake, Washington Post senior political reporter, and Eli Stokols, White House reporter for the LA Times. Jeremy Bash, let me start with you. You have worked in the intelligence universe for most of your career and dealt with intelligence at the Pentagon for your tour there. Talk about what it does, not just to the heads of these agencies, but to the people who work under them, many, many layers under them, to hear the American president so blatantly and repeatedly contradict the universally agreed upon assessments of the intelligence community.
Hey, here's the problem, Nicole, which is when an intelligence officer of the United States goes out and tries to recruit a human asset, whether that individual is behind enemy lines or someone who's going to report on the actions of an adversary government or terrorist organization or proliferation network, what our CIA officers do is they say to that human asset, listen, our president needs this information. Our president needs this information to protect America, to protect the West, and to protect freedom around the world. And now we can't do that. And in fact, the people who are risking their lives, the officers and the agents that they're kind of sworn to protect, those people cannot count on the president of the United States, because here we have him taking the word of an adversary. And look, I think Vladimir Putin has kind of two mortal enemies. One is NATO, because he sees that as a tool of America, and he successfully got Donald Trump to undermine NATO this week. And the second is the U.S. intelligence community and the FBI in particular, because those are the entities that have been able to penetrate the Russian government, find out what they're doing, and actually roll up Russian activities here in the United States.
I want to ask you, Aaron Blake, to watch the president in an interview with Jeff Glor when he was asked about Dan Coats. And I just want to put this statement from the president in the context of what predates his presidency. I'd guess that in the transition, his war with the intelligence community was one of the flashpoints of that period between the election and his inauguration. And it seems to be his distrust of his own appointees at the intelligence agencies is ongoing. Let's watch and talk about it on the other side.
Your DNI, Dan Coats, said that America's digital infrastructure is at a critical point right now.
Yeah.
Similar to what it was like in some ways before 9/11, and that is we're susceptible to a large-scale attack. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know if I agree with that. I'd have to look.
Who says that about you? Oh, I don't know if I agree with him. He's just some guy. That is his own hand-selected leader of the intelligence community.
And I think that clip, more than what the president said next to Vladimir Putin, more than what happened today in that pool spray at the White House, shows just exactly where the president is coming from. Today it was suggesting it was suggesting that he differed with Dan Coats, something that Dan Coats has said, but he wasn't directly talking about it. He was not asked about that. Right. In that question and answer, he was asked directly about something that Dan Coats had said. Dan Coats was quoted, and he said, "I don't know about that." Despite it being something that Dan Coats, Admiral Mike Rogers, even Mike Pompeo, who is Trump's ally, right, have said to reporters and said under oath in congressional hearings. This is something that has been acknowledged for months, that Russia would try this again. So the fact that the president either wouldn't know that or wants to call that into question, I think is pretty clear from today.
And Pompeo, I think what you're trying to say is not just his ally.